Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. One of the problems we have had in Zimbabwe is just how little Zimbabweans have been paying attention to what is really happening in that country. The role of SADC among Zimbabweans is one of the most little understood. Yes, I'll be the first one to admit that SADC leaders could have done a lot more to help the various SADC members sort out their problems, not least of all Zimbabwe. But some of the things that SADC has done, they've not been given full credit for. And this is what I would like to talk about today. This cartoon saying SADC slams door on Chamisa, I think fails to understand what has really been happening. Zimbabwe has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. That is a historic fact. I've said it on a number of occasions on this platform, and I'll say it again. Since 1980, ZANU-PF has rigged elections. In 1980, the Lancaster House talks, it was agreed that ZANU and ZAPU, who had operatives in the field, would withdraw all their operatives to assembly points during the campaign period leading up to independence. But as soon as Mugabe got back and his team got back to Zimbabwe, they changed their mind. The decision was, from there on, they would not pull out their operatives from the field. Not all of them. A number of them were left in the field, and they were given specific instructions to tell the populace that if ZANU-PF does not win the 1980 elections, the regime, ZANU-PF, will continue the Bush War. It is no surprise that the ordinary people of Zimbabwe voted in 1980 to end the Bush War. And with that vote, they lost their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. With the Gukura Wundi, ZANU-PF consolidated its rule, because at the end of it, in 1987, PF-ZAPU was forced to sign the so-called ZANU-PF, PF-ZAPU Unity Accords, which meant that ZAPU ceased to exist. And with that formation, cleared the way for Mugabe to impose the de facto one-party state, which had ruled the country until then, but to this day. Well, elections were held. SADC never condemned ZANU-PF elections. Never. Not until the 2008 elections. And here, we've got to give credit where credit is due. SADC leaders were the ones who forced ZANU-PF to accept electoral reforms to allow meaningful, free, fair, and credible elections to take place. This is after the events where opposition parties were abused and beaten up, including Tsvangirai. Many people are familiar with that photograph of him with the swollen face, and Nelson Chamisa, beaten up, left for dead. SADC leaders applied pressure on ZANU-PF to carry out a number of electoral reforms, including the reform that said all counting will be done at the polling station. And the results will be given to the various key officials in the electoral process and posted outside the polling station. That was SADC. And when ZANU-PF saw the results, or were aware of the results and how badly they performed, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga stepped in, stopped ZEC from declaring the results, and went on to do their own counting. Why it took 45 weeks to count 5 million votes, biggest belief, of course. But in the recounting, they whittled down Tsvangirai's victory and gave him 47%, enough to force the runoff. Here is Mnangagwa boasting about his role in the 2008 elections.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaurira baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zivi gadzirai chi cabinet asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru, we know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
That was the tragedy of the 2008 elections. Mnangagwa and Chiwenga are the ones who reportedly told Mugabe is not going anywhere, who masterminded the Operation Mafutera Papi, in which the war veterans, the army, the police, the CIO, the prison services, personnel were used in orchestrating the worst electoral violence in Zimbabwe's history. Credit where credit is due, SADC refused to accept ZANU-PF when Mugabe declared himself to be the elected leader after the runoff. SADC refused to accept that result. And it was the result of SADC refusing to accept the result that forced Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF to go into the GNU. Yes, throughout the GNU, SADC could have done a lot more to force the parties in the GNU to implement the democratic reforms. But we cannot deny that the main task of implementing the democratic reform was that of Morgan Tsvangirai and Atham Tambara and their respective MDC fellow leaders. They had 5 years to implement the democratic reforms. They failed to implement even one. What Mugabe did was to bribe the MDC leaders. He gave the E-Class Mercedes-Benz to all the deputy ministers, the 2 deputy prime ministers, and Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai himself. The generous salary and allowances all round. And for Morgan Tsvangirai, the $4 million mansion in Ireland. And MDC in return forgot about the reforms. We cannot blame SADC for that. So it is nonsensical the way we keep on, or at least the opposition, MDC, CCC, keep on trying to blame SADC for their own failings. The main reason for the failure was not SADC. It was the opposition. As the GNU were coming to the conclusion in 2013, when SADC leaders realized that our friends in the MDC had failed to implement any meaningful democratic reforms, they did advise Morgan Tsvangirai and company not to participate in the 2013 elections without implementing reforms. Morgan Tsvangirai and company ignored the warning. SADC could not enforce that the election should not go ahead, particularly when they learned from Patrick Chamisa, who was then the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs throughout the GNU, that there were no outstanding reforms to be implemented. It turned out that the opposition MDC leaders had failed to submit even one reform proposal in 5 years. So we have got to get the facts, the historic facts right. When MDC guys insisted in participating in flawed elections, what did you want SADC to do? ZANU-PF, the opposition, are participating. They've been advised not to go ahead, and they ignored the advice. What did you want SADC to do? And yet, SADC still came to our rescue in 2023. SADC and the AU election observers condemned the Zimbabwe election process as flawed. That is a historic fact. Here is the SADC chairperson of the election observer team that was sent in 2023, speaking on that very issue.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, you know. But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, you know, there's a comparison, you know, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report, and then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, that are coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of the elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election, and they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
He couldn't be more explicit on that issue. So why did Nelson Chamisa tell the people of Zimbabwe before the 2018 elections that MDC alliance had stringent measures to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections? He repeated the same idiotic lie in 2023. He claimed that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. He even invoked the name of God. Hashtag God is in it. What did you want SADC to do? As much as SADC had condemned the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal, they could not, however, go the extra step and deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy. precisely because the people of Zimbabwe had participated in those flawed elections in their millions. Nearly 2 million Zimbabweans voted in 2023 for Chamisa. So to keep on blaming SADC for our own foolishness is the most irresponsible thing we can do. It also stops us making the right decisions, because the most important task before us now is that 2028 elections, which are only 3 years down the line, are going to be a repeat of 2023. ZANU-PF has not implemented even one token reform. Not even one token reform since the last election, 2023. So it is almost certain that ZANU-PF will rig 2028 elections. And if we are going to believe Chamisa's idiotic lies that he has plugged vote rigging loopholes and is going to win big and participate in those flawed elections, ignoring the warning that if we participate, we give the regime legitimacy, we only have ourselves to blame. We cannot keep on making the same mistakes over and over again and expect to get away with it. It is not SADC who have thrown Chamisa in the opposition. Chamisa in the opposition threw themselves out. They had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms. They failed to implement even one during the JNU. They have been conning the people of Zimbabwe to participate in flawed elections, knowing fully well that if you participate, you give the regime legitimacy. Chamisa has even gone further after all these rigged elections to make most outrageous claims that SADC was going to do A, B, C, D, which have turned out again and again to be just another lie. If we participate in 2028 because we believe Chamisa's idiotic lies, we should accept that SADC have warned us not to do so. They warned us in 2013 about the folly of participating in flawed elections. They warned us again after the 2023 elections. We had Dr. Nevas Mumba there talking about the need to make sure that we have gotten the reforms implemented way before the elections. This mentality that some people have that we can participate in flawed elections and then go out in the street to protest that ZANU-PF rigged the elections is completely misguided. Why are we giving ZANU-PF legitimacy in the first place? The people of Zimbabwe need to wake up and get the facts right. A prosperous democratic nation demands that we should be educated, knowledgeable, objective, and diligent. At the present moment, the Zimbabwe electorate, we have shown again and again that we are ignorant, naive, and gullible, easily conned into doing idiotic things like participating in flawed elections only to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good night.